Hello and welcome to the Local Authors Book Club. We're here today with Joan Kop. I know it says Kopczynski on the screen, but it's okay. If you can try it either way, however you'd like. She made it convenient for us. So I'm really happy to have you with us today, Joan, because this book, I just started reading it, and I got to tell you, it starts off differently than most books I have read. It is a memoir, and so I will let her explain all that. But I am really curious, Joan, about how you decided to start the book exactly the way you did. You're going to have to, you know, sneak a little, tell everybody a little bit of, I don't know if it's a spoiler or not, because it's just at the beginning. But anyway, what got you started with that particular entry into the writing?
You mean the way I started the book? Is that what you're asking? Well, I what I did, I was writing with I worked with a Writer's Digest tutor. Robert Gober was my writing coach for about 15 years until he died.
Oh,
And then also my cousin Sue Jostrom, who edited the book, she has a editor's license from the University of Washington. And anyway, I sent them, basically, an autobiography. And based on their comments, that was the most interesting part of my life. So I took out 13 years and then I had the book pretty much written, and Sue said, well, I think there's something missing. And so I took part of a different book, a spy thriller that I was reading, that I had written, and that it was based on true stuff. So I just switched the book. So it starts out, with my relationship with an FBI agent, and, how I met him and stuff. And, but anyway, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself that isn't in the book. Sibling rivalry was, alive and well in my family. I come from a family of 10 kids, and I always wanted to beat my little brother, because he used to beat me up when I was a kid. So I wanted to do something to beat him. And I thought, well, I'll show him I'll become a millionaire in the family, first millionaire in the family. Well, I didn't, I was naive, but anyway, that wasn't my mom and dad's hope. They hoped to have a priest or a nun in the family, but like that was going to happen for me, no way. But anyway, being a boy in the family, I had three brothers, and my dad was an electrician in a small town in Idaho, and he taught him the skills of the trade, and all three of them became electrical engineers. My mother, there was different opportunities for girls in the family. My mother taught us how to clean house to support ourselves. And hard work, not education, was touted in our family as the way to get ahead. And I took my mother's advice and became a janitor for my school and the community hall. And but I want to tell you, you probably are wondering how a girl from a small town in Idaho ended up working for the CIA.
yeah.
And there were basically three reasons. I babysat for a family of 10 kids. They had a child every year for 10 years. They skipped 1 year and then had a set of twins. So at one time there were 4 kids in diapers. And anyway, I babysat them a lot. And after I put them to bed at 9 o'clock, the show Mission Impossible was on TV. And I just was glued to the set. It had so much adventure and intrigue, for me in a small town that, I wanted to join the CIA and do something. I didn't want to be saddled with having kids, after high school, because I knew how much work it was. I mean, 4 kids in diapers, that was a lot of work. And so the second reason was I had a traumatic experience with my parents when I was 18 years old. And I talk about that in the afterword of the book. So in the back of the book, so I don't want to go over that. But that was the second reason. And the third reason was I had a teacher in high school that really influenced me. Her name was Mrs. Dreblow. And she was an old Navy broad. And she said that girls from that went to be a legal secretary at Kinman Business University in Spokane, the CIA was recruiting legal secretaries, and it's a great way to see the world. Well, my family lived below the poverty level, so this looked really exciting to go travel on the government's dime and see the world, and so that looked really attractive. But when a recruiter came around, I applied and stuff, and then a recruiter contacted me, and I was going to tell him no. We met at the Davenport Hotel, I remember, and I was all prepared to tell him no. I had changed my mind. I had a boyfriend. I was going to stay there, and I could. Mary Higgins, who I had lived with, she and her husband, a doctor, and his wife, I stayed with them while I went to Kinman, and she offered me a job at the mental health clinic. And but anyway, I was going to tell this guy no, but he persuaded me to go ahead and join the CIA. So I ended up doing that. But then after 5 years, I quit. I was working in San Francisco, and I quit working for the CIA. A boss that I had there recruited me to work for his company. And I had wanted to go back to school to do something else. And so that was kind of an easy transition. And I went to see a counselor at the University of California at Berkeley, because I wanted to go for an undergraduate degree in journalism. But she said Berkeley doesn't even have an undergraduate degree in journalism. And we found that the best writers know about something besides English. And so that influenced me. So what I majored in college, first political science, and then I changed my major to economics. But so anyway, my book is really about a couple things: being betrayed by the FBI agent. I was befriended by a KGB agent who had this story about defecting. I mean, it was really weird. And then I was embarrassed twice by this economics professor in class. And then I thought, I had so much stress that I thought, it's either fight or flight. And I took the option to flight. My parents were saying, come home, we love you and stuff. And so my brother-in-law came to pack me out, and I drove a little Volkswagen Bug. He put the Bug in the back of the semi truck and put all my belongings there. And we're driving across the Oakland Bay Bridge, and he turns to me and he said, those people that you work for, are they related to the Trilateral Commission? I mean, I was like, what? My brother-in-law was a logger, he was in the lumber business, and for him to say something like that was totally out of character. And then he talked about this book that the KGB agent talked to me about, this Armageddon book. And he even brought along in his suitcase, and the whole thing was just bizarre. And I didn't know who he was talking to, if he was talking to communists, if he was talking to the KGB, or who he was talking to. He wouldn't tell me, and just a lot of really bizarre stuff. And he had drove for a while. He made me drive the semi. I had no training in driving a semi. and he almost fell asleep. And then he had me go to this out of the way rest stop. And there were a bunch of guys in there with like walkie-talkies on their belt or something, you know. And then
Who is this guy?
this is my brother-in-law.
Oh, okay.
So I trusted him. You know, I thought, I'm going home. I'm leaving all the crazies in San Francisco. I'm going home. I'll be safe. And then all this crap happened. And there's more to the story. So,
Mhm.
but anyway, that's basically it. One thing I kind of wanted to talk about that's not in my book, but I wanted to I wanted to give advice to other people regarding a mental illness. I want to tell how family members or friends can help someone that has a mental illness. And the first thing is to watch for changes in their personality or behavior. And the second thing, and this is really important, practice non-judgmental listening and patience. Steer clear of accusations, avoid dismissing them and their issues. Never tell your loved one that their symptoms are not true, not real, imaginary, or all in their head. And avoid arguments about their belief. And the third thing is to check in with them regularly for a chat if you're not nearby. And the fourth is encourage them to get treatment and support them in making decisions. And the fifth is offer encouragement to eat healthy, exercise every day, and get enough sleep, or be frugal with their money. And try not to give repeated unsolicited advice to somebody like that. And
the folks here today don't know why you are adding all of this information. Um, you
oh,
had your
my
own
book is
experience,
about the schizoaffective disorder. It's about mental illness. Yeah.
and they may not be aware that that's a part of your life. So that's why I was saying they might want a little explanation for is does your book have the any of the like when you were diagnosed or how that came about? Is that in your book?
Yeah. Yeah. My story, like I said, it covers about 13 years of my life.
Mhm.
And, at one point, well, I ended up going to City College in San Francisco for 2 years. And then this economics professor publicly embarrassed me twice in front of class. And then I kind of, all the stress came to a head. I had been befriended by that KGB agent. There was a lot of other stuff going on.
Mhm.
And so then I left to go back to the Northwest. I finished my degree at Gonzaga. And one reason I had a choice, I was accepted to the University of Idaho and Gonzaga. And I think I also applied to San Francisco State. But I knew that the Jesuits wouldn't let any professor do that to me, embarrass me in front of class like that, publicly embarrass me. So that was one reason I went to Gonzaga. And plus the tuition between Gonzaga and the University of Idaho wasn't all that much difference.
So the
So
stress that you were experiencing, did you go to any doctor or anything to get any help, or how did that
um
connect with the mental illness?
well, what I did, I started having trouble at school. No one really knew my story. I was living with my sister and her husband, and she wasn't listening to me. Um, she was arguing with me because I was telling her things about my mother, and she tried to defend my mother, and she just wasn't listening to me. And my other family members, I wasn't talking to any of them, and this was before cell phones. So I didn't have contact with anybody. And I ended up going to see a priest. You go to confession with a priest, and I didn't know what was wrong. I just needed somebody to understand what I had went through. I tried talking to some of the Jesuits, but it was all kind of jumbled, you know, crazy things like, a KGB agent and a professor and stuff that embarrassed me, just things that any normal person would have stress over. But and then plus I moved from California. I cut off all ties with everybody that I knew in California, my friends and everybody. And I was in Spokane. I didn't have a job. I was totally isolated. I didn't have anybody to talk to. So I went to see this priest. And then this one day I had a really bad day and I went to see him and he said, "Oh, Joan, I'm sorry. I have a penance service I have to prepare for. I can't see you today." And that was the last straw. So then I called Mary Higgins. I had stayed with her family. I knew her and she was the director of the mental health clinic. And so I called her and I said, "I need somebody to talk to." So she gave me her friend, Marilyn Wilson. So I went to see Marilyn as a therapist. And luckily, the mental health clinic, you could pay on a sliding scale. I had no money, to pay, and they let you pay on a sliding scale. So I saw her for probably maybe a year or something. But back then they didn't tell the patient their diagnosis. I got the notes later on, and she wrote that I had problems with schizophrenia, but I didn't get a diagnosis or anything. And then things got better and I left Gonzaga and I decided to go back to Washington, D.C. to become a stockbroker. My counselor at Gonzaga was a former senior partner with Dean Witter. And I had sold books door to door during the summer, 2 summers that I went to college in Texas. And so I thought, well, I have the sales ability and, I think I can do this. But I thought there was more wealth back in Northern Virginia or the Washington, D.C. area. So I decided to move back there. And I put all my stuff in storage and moved. I stayed with a girlfriend. She let me use her car. And, it took a while before, and I also needed telemarketing experience, which I got from a small job. And then I worked for a couple para brokers and got into the stock brokerage business. And then I had trouble again. Depression hit. I was single, not married, no kids. And a girlfriend was moving into a brand new house. She had a husband and a kid and stuff. And at that time, a girl my age, I was 30 and no prospects. I was failing in the stock brokerage business. I didn't have enough money. I was borrowing money from my parents. And so I ended up going to see, I looked in the phone book to find a psychiatrist, and I went to see him, and I was 31 years old, and he gave me the diagnosis, which stuck, which is schizoaffective disorder and bipolar. They call it also that, with tendencies. So after
what are the symptoms of schizoaffective disorder?
Well, you either have hallucinations. For schizophrenia, you either have hallucinations or delusions or yeah, basically that. So or paranoia. I suffered from paranoia, but I didn't know really, because I had worked for the CIA. And there's a legendary spy in the CIA who's called James Angleton. He's legendary, and he was high up in the CIA, and he was very paranoid. So I didn't know if I was thinking like a CIA analyst or if it was an illness. And I was glad to find out it was an illness because then I could do something about it. I could could do things to recover. But if it was just bizarre behavior, or if I was just weird, what can you do with that? So
Yeah, like me, just weird.
then I had the psychiatrist I saw, someone sent a pipe bomb to him in the mail and it blew up in his face and it put
Wow.
him out of business. And it not only ruined his life, it ruined my own. I got matched with, I had a choice of two other psychiatrists because he had to go to somebody else because he was out of commission. And so I chose this one young psychiatrist, and he weaned me off a drug that I needed, Trilofine, which is an antipsychotic for schizophrenia. And he weaned me off that. And I saw on, the inserts that come to the pharmacy, I got those, and it said, some people who are weaned off this drug, it causes mania. Well, it caused mania in me. I asked a friend who was a best-selling author, and he was also a spy. I said, well, and he made $1 million off his book. And I said, if I become an author and make $1 million off my book, I won't need my retirement accounts, will I? And he said, no. So I emptied out my retirement accounts, followed a different old boyfriend to Florida who did not love me. And then when I came down from my high, I didn't even see him at all. And then I called my friend Jack, who was the author, and I said, he was twice my age, but we were also lovers. And I said, put your dad hat on. What should I? He was very intelligent. I knew he was more intelligent than I was. And I said, what should I do now? I've ruined my life. And he said, go home where you are loved. And so I went back from Florida. I went back to the Northwest. But my mother, we always had a tough time, and she didn't want me to live with her and dad. She said, you're not living with us. So what was I going to do? My brother Don then stepped in and said, you can live with me. And so I lived with him for 6 months. He didn't charge me rent or anything. And so yeah, that was it. So
Yeah, I've known some people that have been diagnosed uh, as manic depressive, and people are, they're apt to do almost anything in a manic phase. I mean, they just think they can take on the world, and wow. So you've had this is fascinating. I mean, there's so much to learn from your experience. And is much of this in the book itself?
oh, it's all in the book.
Okay, so you're actually able to promote it as something to help you. I wonder if I'm thinking now, I'm putting on my promotional hat, and I'm thinking about organizations that might be interested in selling or buying copies of the book to give to some of the different doctors and different people.
So I belong to NAMI, the National Alliance on the Mental Illness. And
Huh?
when I sold my book, in bookstores, when it came out in 2010, before I put the new afterword and the new prologue on,
Mhm.
I sold in bookstores, and most of the people that bought the book were not mentally ill. So I thought that would be a big draw, that I could sell. There's millions of people who have mental illness, and I thought that would be a huge market. In fact, that's what I had sent to Russ at Grey Dog Press, because he did the first printing. And I just found my book is good for someone who doesn't have a mental illness, you can
Right,
tell
right.
the processes that someone with a mental illness goes through.
That's
You
what
know,
I was thinking of is organizations that with people that have clinics and things that are members, and they might be interested in having the book, available and for their staff to read as some additional, because firsthand experience is something that um, it can be very helpful. I mean, even if a person goes through school for years related to psychological or psychiatric uh, things, they still can benefit from hearing the actual experience of someone, and it can help them to understand what it's like, because if those individuals have not personally experienced any of this, then it's a way for them to get some, information that's aside from talking to a patient. You know what I mean? You're reading a book, so you're not actually engaging with a patient that you're working with. But there's a lot of even staff in clinics that aren't the actual psychologists or people working with people, and they could benefit from information that would help
Yeah,
them.
I don't know how you would get it in those clinics. And even my doctor in Spokane, Dr. Bott, I was going to mention, he did, I gave him a copy of my book, and also the secretary that was there for a long time. I gave them both a copy of my book when it came out. And usually when you go to a psychiatric appointment, you talk to them for a half an hour about what's going on in your life now and whether you have problems with your medication or something like that.
Yeah,
And you don't really have a chance to get your whole story out. But I gave Dr. Bott my book, and he figured out that my depression was not biological, it was situational. And that was huge because
right.
I was taking lithium at the time. Um, for a long time, I took lithium for, I don't know, 20 years or something, and I didn't need it. And it can ruin your thyroid and hurt your kidneys and stuff. And
Yeah,
a lot of time he tried to get me to wean off of it, but I was afraid it would ruin my life like the other doctor had done. I just didn't trust him enough, but I was able to get weaned off that, and I didn't ever need that drug. So, but that you don't have a chance to, I think this is important for people who do have a mental illness to write about it, because the more stories are out, the less stigma there is around it, surrounding it. And it can also help your medical provider know your whole history, whereas you don't have time. If you have a half-hour appointment once every 6 months, you don't have time to go over all that.
sure.
So
Well, I'm going to be thinking on this, and maybe I can come up with something, because there's got to be organizations that these clinics or different professionals belong to. It's what I'm talking about, and that because you're located here in Spokane and you can't go to all those clinics, but there may be a way of coordinating with an organization to which those clinics are members. You see what I mean? And maybe they would want to do something with the book. But meanwhile, let's go ahead and open it up for questions for the people that are here today. And I was going to tell all of you too that the book is available. Joan has it. You can go to her website, but it's also available at Auntie's now. And if you do decide you want to buy a book down there, ask for your 15% discount, okay? But and maybe you'd be willing to talk to them about, even since these are writers, maybe they've got some writer related questions for you.
oh yeah, I'm willing to answer anything.
I had a question. In a book that I'm trying to interest agents in, uh, a young man develops schizophrenia, and in my synopsis that I've sent out, I state that, this character developed schizophrenia up front. But recently I was going through it again because I've got like a short, medium, long synopsis. And as I was going through, and I was pointing out the change in his personality, and then the destructive ideas that he decided to pursue, which would harm people. And so there's symptoms,
Nations or delusions.
delusions,
Yeah.
and anyways, I was surprised that when I was redoing the synopsis, that I didn't use the word schizophrenia. I just described his behavior and his plans, destructive plans he was making. So I was surprised that, maybe just putting a schizophrenia up front or just simply describing the symptoms so that, let's say, an agent or someone who's reading my manuscript would put it together that this guy's gone mentally ill.
I would put it up front because not everybody has experience with mental illness. They don't know the symptoms unless you've researched it yourself, they wouldn't know the symptoms. So I'd put it up front.
Yeah, well, I guess my comeback on that is that so many, let's say, individuals that are doing try to assassinate political person thing, or so much of that's in the news. I think people do know that this guy is mentally ill. What you hear on the evening news. So,
But even when you hear on the news, they don't always mention it's a mental illness. If you're familiar with mental illness, you would recognize it. But if you're not familiar with mental illness, you wouldn't have any idea.
all right. Linda, what are you shaking your head about?
I'm just saying that we can never make an assumption that anybody else knows anything. Okay?
Really?
Yeah, you have to work from that as a basis. Then you look at who you're writing to or who you're talking to, and like knowing what Joan has put out now, you see, I know enough about Joan to know that I can engage her in conversation about mental illness, and it won't just be some conversation over here that has nothing to do with reality, you see. Everybody else on this screen, I would have to assume until I knew differently, they don't know anything about mental illness. Now, just getting depressed once in a while, that's not mental illness, okay? Everybody goes through things like that. There are specific things that get diagnosed based on symptoms and the way people act and that. And so you can talk to somebody like Joan after you see she knows what she's talking about, you see. But nobody else on this screen, including me, I'm not an expert in mental illness. See what I'm saying? So you
Yeah.
market things, and if that's a major component in your story, you can't market it as though people are going to know what you're talking about.
Unless you have a specific audience.
Yeah. And an agent, they're just looking for certain things. They're looking for, is it a terrorist? Is it a killer? Is it a, whatever kind of book you're writing? What is it? And they're looking for key things. They're not looking for things they don't expect to find. Okay.
Okay, Jonah.
If the key things are missing, they're going to set your book aside and say, I don't care what else he's got in there. I'm looking for this. Because agents are always looking for specific things.
Okay. So Joan, is there a difference between someone who's paranoid and a paranoid schizophrenic? Are they the same thing?
There's paranoia and there's schizophrenic paranoia. They're two different things. You can look up in the psychiatrist Bible, the DSM. It's called DSM. Look up in there. That's where I'd go to.
Right.
Yeah. And Joan can't really say too much. We're recording and she can't say too much because she isn't a doctor. And when people do start, answering questions like this, she could get in trouble. I mean, she can speak about her own experience, but please don't expect her to step over that line. I think I'm right, Joan.
Right. Yeah.
What Bible was that, Joan?
DSM. Donald Sam Monkey.
Okay.
And it doesn't have the word Bible in it. It's just their main book.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anybody else with a question about either the concepts in the book or, yeah, Janet?
I just am wondering if her family read the book, and if they did their relationship with her change in any way afterward, when maybe they had a little more insight into what was going on?
That is a very good question, and it came up recently. Most of my family members, I don't think, have read the book. One of the reasons I wrote the book was because, it was never a good chance to get my story out to my family members because small talk, in family gatherings, you just don't talk about that. And my family also did not talk about feelings. And, there's a lot of emotion in my book. And some family members, there's one, my sister will absolutely not read the book because there's some negative things in there about her. I didn't think they were all that negative, but she refuses to read it. So yeah. So most of my family members, I don't think, have read it, which
Okay.
is,
That's too bad.
but I also told some of my family members, I said, you might not have a mental illness, but some of your kids might, because the illness usually surfaces between 20 to 30, usually about 20, when you're 25 years old, the illness surfaces. And it takes a big stress in your life for the illness to surface. And my younger sister has a son who ended up with bipolar illness.
Yeah.
He
Have
said
they
he
have they linked it at all with inherited traits or?
Well, my doctor said, I did find an aunt, my great aunt, who was my mother's aunt, was in what we called the insane asylum in Orfino, Idaho. She was in there for 40 years.
Oh,
My mother never talked about her, and I tried to get her records because of HIPAA. You couldn't get the records, but I did get her death certificate, and she was schizophrenic, but not paranoid. It wasn't paranoid schizophrenia. But with modern drugs today, she wouldn't have been in there, and but part of mine is environmental or family oriented stuff. It's not genetic, part of it could be genetic, but they don't really know why some family members get it and some don't. The only reason I think I did, if I had stayed in the Northwest, had married the guy that I was dating, had never gone to the CIA or, had this experience with an FBI agent or all this crazy stuff in California, I may have lived a normal life and never have had the illness surface either. It just takes a tremendous amount of stress to bring out the illness, but anyway.
Well, I can imagine that you really are sincerely wanting to have your personal experience count for something other than just being ill and having problems. I can see why you would like to help others with it, and that's important that we see if we can't find a way to do some more of that, Joan.
Well, what I also decided early on is that I didn't want to be defined by my mental illness. That's why I chose writing. I want to write good books and be known for those rather than, my mental illness, because I don't think that defines me.
No.
I've lived now for 35, 40 years and have been stable. I never had a psychotic episode except for about 30 or 35 or 40 years ago. I never had another one. I've been, I take my medication faithfully. I'm healthy. I eat, good meals. I exercise a lot daily. And, I have learned things to, in my recovery, learn things to do certain things. But I've been pretty stable for the last 40 years, I'd say.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we're coming up on later time. If anybody, do you have any other questions or comments? And gosh, this has been extremely helpful, Joan. I know people who deal with people with problems like this, and I had no idea that, because I hadn't read the book yet. I just started reading it, and I had no idea that it was such an intensive part of the story that you were sharing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, but
Yeah.
yeah. So it's hard really to tell people what your book is about, because people who read like spy novels would be interested in the spy part of it,
Mm-hmm.
Or the FBI agent or something. But
Yeah.
then some people who have the illness would be interested in just the illness parts of it. It's kind of
And the subtitle kind of lets people know that this is an integral part of the book. Whereas just the title, if people just see the title, they think, oh, it's a spy adventure kind of thing, Even with the word psychosis in there, it still just seems that way, offhand. And that subtitle does help, I think. But most people don't. It's sad, but we live at a time when people just don't get into things that much. They'll read the cover, oh, it's about spies, and lay it down, if they're not into spies.
well, it's funny how that title came about. I was in that group used to remember Bob Mannion and Betty Cooper. They all met, Marion Schieffer. They all met at Rosar's Deli on 29th.
Right.
And we were sitting in there, and Bob Mannion was at the table and Marion Schieffer was there. And we were trying to come up with a title for my memoir. And Bob Mannion came up with the Spies Lies, and we needed something else besides that. And Marion said, how about Psychosis? But it's funny, and so that's why it became Spies, Lies, and Psychosis. But I was unemployed for quite a while. About, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, I was unemployed for about 2 years. And I'd go to these interviews, and I thought, well, I'm going to tell people that I'm an author. And my only book was about mental illness. So it wasn't too great to tell people about my book, but I was interviewing for a sales job, and the sales manager, asked me what the title of my book was. He asked me to say it 3 times, and then he asked me to spell psychosis. And he didn't hire me.
Oh, oh wow. Well, well, I certainly appreciate your being with us today. So, we'll have this up on YouTube too, and I can point to it and say, as I promote things and say, if you want some good talk about mental illness and people and how they can get some help, and we were talking earlier before a couple of you arrived, that on the 10th, now the regular mental health month is in May, but every year, but the International Mental Health Day is on October 10th. And there's 150 countries that have activities and a focus on this topic. So you might want to go out and look for some information, because I'm sure there'll be some being put out there. And if here's a pitch. If you know anyone that you think might have some difficulties with mental illness, please see what the local services are available to them and see if you can't get them some help. Because sometimes that's all it takes, is just to get them started in some way. And so, and as Joan was saying earlier, not to be ignored, to be listened to. So I hope we listened a little bit today, Joan.
You did. And thank you all for coming. This was great. So it's always good to share your story with people. So
yeah. Well, I will be reviewing this once I get it all actually read. I want to make sure I don't fib and just say it's a good book. Yay, yay, yay. I want to actually be able to talk about it. So thank you so much for being with us. And I don't know if we're going to have somebody next month or who that somebody will be, but I'll be trying. If anybody else thinks they want to be here, so let me know. But meanwhile, and on the 10th, I will be doing a coffee with Linda this month, and then on the 3rd and 17th, is it? I think the 17th we'll have the guild meeting, and it'll be Nate Barnum out of Idaho, and he will talk about audiobooks. So yeah, and he's a narrator, but he also knows about the industry, so he could fill us in a little bit about, because there's been some folks that were interested in having their books done in audio. So.
And when is Kayla doing the thing on newsletter?
She will be in November. Yeah.
Oh, November.
Layla, yeah. She wanted a little bit later. She had a death in the family, and it was, she had a lot on her plate, so we moved it down to November. Well, thanks a lot, folks, and I hope and Dan says he will catch up with the video later, because he ended up here late, so he apologized. Thank you, Dan. And good to see all your happy faces, Honda. Smile. Take care, y'all.